Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion, but not much longer. It is almost hurricane season. Today is May 3rd, 2021, but yep, it's almost hurricane season. It is the month of May, and on May 15th, this will transition over to just the regular old Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. The logo will change. We will lose the blue tornado and go back to the, this guy right here, the HurricaneTrack on-season logo, because hurricane season's coming up. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in today's update, what to expect this season, a couple of new things that we're looking at, including a tweet over the weekend from Ben Knoll, our man down in New Zealand, and then, of course, it is still spring severe weather season, and I'm very interested in that, especially after going out to Texas last week. I've got some new ideas, and I've been talking about those with a few of my colleagues over the last few days, and we're developing a plan to cover severe weather with a purpose. All right, so we'll talk about that and a few other odds and ends here and there. So let's start off with this tweet from Ben Knoll. This was tweeted just a couple of days ago. The CANSIPS, that's out of Canada, Environment Canada, their climate-coupled model system, and the velocity potential, or the upward motion, for the hurricane season ahead. This is August through October of this year. That's the time frame right there. So right in the peak of the hurricane season, and lots of rising motion over Africa, which will help to generate numerous tropical waves that will come out into the Atlantic. A little bit of a rising cell here in the southeastern Pacific. So maybe a more active southeast Pacific this year, which could bring a threat to Mexico, and maybe even up into the desert southwest with some of those tropical cyclones. It's going to be, obviously, a different season than last year, but still probably busy, busier than average. And, whether or not anything actually makes landfall anywhere remains to be seen. There's no way that we can predict that. But this is a pretty clear signal, once again, that the 2021 hurricane season should be rather busy. The green area is that upward motion, or as Ben says, rising air, and then the sort of darker red and whatever that color is sinking air. And sinking air suppresses and keeps down, kind of puts a lid on tropical convection. So this is an interesting look. Ben talks about that with his commentary, as much as you can squeeze in on Twitter, that with convective forcing favored over Africa, this does not support a quiet Atlantic hurricane season. It does not support that. And the overall La Nina-Madoki-like pattern, one difference compared to last year is the possibility for more eastern Pacific activity. So again, you folks in Mexico on the Pacific side had it pretty good last year with not too many threats to worry about, but that could change this year if this comes to fruition. Maybe less activity in the Western Caribbean. So our friends in Central America that had to deal with, Eta and Iota, and maybe even Gamma that came through there, making landfall in the Yucatan. Maybe less activity in the Caribbean, but you never know. You could have a 2 to 3 week window where things are perfect that this particular modeling is not going to be able to see. And you think about the 04 season, it was really about a 6-week window from the very end of July, when we had Hurricane Alex form the first few days of August, until about mid-September, ending with Hurricane Jean. Think about everything that happened in between. You had Charlie, you had Ivan in there, you had Francis, and Jean, Alex and Jean kind of bookending, and you had Gaston, Hurricane Gaston, up in the low country of South Carolina. All of that within about a 6-week window. And then the 2004 hurricane season pretty much shut down for the most part. Whereas other years, like 05, it was a long season. It went from June with the start of Arlene, and then all the way in terms of the letters of the alphabet, ending with a landfall of Wilma at the end of October. And then 2020, last year, very busy throughout the entire hurricane season, getting way into the Greek alphabet, which we will no longer be using. Now there's a supplemental list of names. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, it's coming. Hurricane season is approaching. And don't forget, advisories, or at least the I keep saying advisories. It's the tropical weather outlooks. The outlooks, that's the word. Those are going to be issued in mid-May, May 15th. That will happen here for the Eastern Pacific Basin. We'll put an E in here for Eastern Pacific, an L over here for Atlantic, because that's how they designate those areas of investigation. 91L, that's what the L stands for, is Atlantic. And it's actually AL or whatever, but us weather geeks, we just, I guess, get lazy and just call it an L. 91L or 90E for Eastern Pacific. Tropical weather outlooks begin in about 12 days. So there you go. All right, anything happening out there now? No, of course not. You know, it's still a little too early. Thank goodness we got enough of other stuff to deal with. Believe me, a little bit of convection popping up here and there, showing you it's getting to be that time of year. But strong upper-level winds cutting across the deep tropics. Generally keep a lid on things. You can see the strong upper-level winds here just by looking at the satellite animation. You don't even have to look at any analysis charts from University of Wisconsin or whatever right now because, I mean, heck, it's only May 3rd, and there's no need for any of that tropical stuff right now. I'm sure there'll be plenty of it later on. So, listen, Hurricane Preparedness Week coming up. May 9th through the 15th. So next week's going to be National Hurricane Preparedness Week, and I will talk about that next week on Monday. Actually, it starts Sunday, technically, but on Monday on my weekly update next week, and we're really going to dig into this. I am concerned about some supply chain issues and other things kind of related to this whole year that we've had dealing with the pandemic here in the United States. And we're seeing some ripple effects, you know, and just a little hint here, things like a shortage of tanker truck drivers. That's a big problem. And if we have a hurricane that's needing to have a whole bunch of gasoline delivered, we may see some shortages. I've just been reading about it out there on the web. You know, no, you can't trust everything you see. And yes, there's a sprinkle of hyperbole or clickbait in some realms. I get that, so you got to be careful. You know, you want to be informed, but you also want to be intelligent about what you are informed about. So I'll try to guide you through that. Just a few things to keep in mind, you know, like the price of plywood. You can definitely check that out yourself. Compare the price of plywood from last year or even 2019 to what it is now, and you'll see what I'm talking about. You know, call up Lowe's or Home Depot and ask them, what's the cost for one sheet of plywood? And it'll shock you if you compare it to what it was last year. And that kind of stuff can be a problem. Not that you should be using plywood to board up. You should actually use storm shutters. But we'll talk about that next week. So, yep, National Hurricane Preparedness Week is coming up. We'll deal with that and start talking about it to help you get you prepared on as many levels as possible starting next week. All right, so looking at a few analysis things here as we move along in our discussion. The Southern Oscillation Index is dropping still, and that is showing us that we're heading more towards a neutral pattern. The 30-day average is just slightly negative. We ended April just slightly positive, but definitely on this downward trend since February. And what does that mean? Well, that means that in a general sense, that the overall pressure pattern across the Pacific, the tropical Pacific, is changing. And so it's not fostering this continuous burst of easterly winds roaring across the trades there and near the equator. Instead, there's been some disruptions. You've had a few westerly winds come across there. The Madden-Julian oscillation kind of disrupting things a little bit. You know, like they say, things are a-changing. And in nature and weather, things don't stay stagnant, especially in weather, meteorology. You know, climate is the building of weather over time. And inside of that climate system, you have lots of variations, and nothing will stay static. And that's the same thing with the Southern Oscillation Index, a great literal barometer, because that's what it is. It's measuring pressure differences between Tahiti, never been there, but I hear it's wonderful, and Darwin in Australia. And the differences between those two locations helps meteorologists, especially those at the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, who've been tracking this for a long, long time, many decades, helps them to understand what the overall background pattern is like. What's, you know, the Southern Oscillation state, the state of the El Nino, part of the Southern Oscillation phenomenon, and those pressure patterns become important. So as we see, it's been trending generally negative, but not strongly so. Not yet. It's been a fairly gradual slope down and a few ups and downs in the 30-day. That's the solid red line. But nevertheless, today's calculation, minus 12, the 90-day average sinking down now just we just round it up and call it 3. So yeah, things are changing more towards a neutral pattern, and we can see that reflected in the sea surface temperature anomalies. They are moderating, warming up from that fairly strong La Nina that we had going out of last year into the winter. Yet, a good deal of the North Pacific here is still running colder than average. We're not having this large warm pool sitting up here. And, it's just a little bit warmer over here in the area. Hey, isn't that interesting? It's a little warmer right where the tweet from Ben Knoll was kind of referencing. There you go. It's a little bit more upward motion there. And what do you see in the anomalies map? A little bit more in the way of positive anomalies. Nothing, shockingly out of the ordinary, but a little bit warmer than average. And then just a few areas down here, slightly below average across the deep tropics, along the equator in the Pacific. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, things are still holding on. Fairly warm compared to average in the main development region, solidly above average up here in the subtropics, warmer than average in the Gulf of Mexico and the waters surrounding Florida. This area can fluctuate. I talk about it often, and you know the drill. The Gulf will always be warm enough, but it is still, the overall look, positive for development in the Atlantic, it seems, and generally negative for development in the Pacific in terms of the overall long-term pattern. Not going to be warmer, no El Nino scene coming, nothing to overwhelm the Atlantic. But because of the moderation from what was looking pretty strong as a La Nina to more neutral conditions, I don't think we're going to end up with 30 named storms again. But you could have 15, 18, maybe 8 or 9 hurricanes, 3 or 4 major hurricanes, and that's enough to make it a very impactful season. And, of course, it only takes one. I know that's cliche, but it is absolutely true. And that's what we will be watching for. Where does that one go that could affect you? We don't know yet. We just don't know. So we look at things like this. What's going on out there? Open up the window. See what's really happening. Sea surface temperatures warming up in the Gulf. If you're along the west coast of Florida here, pretty much from the Nature Coast down to the Keys, you're nice and good to go. Don't need a wetsuit. Water temperatures are about 80 degrees or so. So there's the 26 Celsius line, which is roughly 80 degrees. There's 81 degrees or 27 Celsius. I mean, even up here along the coast of Cuba, parts of the Florida Keys, tucked in there towards the mainland, and then down here off Mexico, nice and warm. Water temperatures in the low 80s. This will continue to progress, obviously. And by June 1st, most of the Gulf of Mexico will be primed for development. It'll just be a matter of whether or not something comes along to take advantage. I saw where the National Weather Service Wilmington tweeted that the water temperatures along the Carolina coast are warming rapidly. That's good. Right now, water temperatures in the upper 60s to low 70s if you're lucky. But just offshore is the Gulf Stream, where water temperatures are in the upper 70s to very, very low 80s. And that's good. I like going to the beach. It won't be long now. However, up here along the New England coast and the mid-Atlantic, still quite a bit chilly. But you know how it goes as you progress towards Memorial Day and beyond. Maybe get a nice heat ridge over the northeast, and your water temperatures will rise as well. What we need is high pressure up over the northeastern states up here to create some easterly flow and kind of blow some of this warmer water towards the shore, push it towards the shore. You want onshore flow and not offshore flow, and that'll help warm up your temperatures. All right, so one of the things as we get deeper into May that I will be using more and more, and if you watch my videos over the years, you know that my favorite layer of the atmosphere in terms of modeling is about 5,000 feet up. The atmosphere is made up of layers, and you've got different areas of what we call vorticity or spin in the atmosphere. You can see things like dew point, humidity, precipitable water, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it is like beyond even people that got meteorology degrees 10 years ago. Now there's stuff out there that would probably even make them scratch their heads and be like, what? This is all new. And that's a good thing. It's advancing. But I like to keep it simple and try to look at, the clues for what show us where hurricanes might develop from. What are the seedlings? And this layer of the atmosphere, the 5,000 foot layer, or what we call the 850 layer, 850 millibars, is a good layer to look at. It's not the best necessarily, but it's what I choose. Let's go with blue. So what do we see here? This is 850 millibars from the GFS, and it's showing that cyclonic vorticity. And so these little areas of yellow in here, some of them are orange or dark red. These are areas of cyclonic vorticity or spin in the atmosphere. Sometimes that vorticity is spread out. The energy is spread out over a large area, like you see here over Texas. There's some energy here crossing through the Carolinas. That can trigger some thunderstorms, that energy. Over the tropics, we're looking to see if that energy comes along, through the trades or whatever, and it can bundle up. Instead of staying all spread out like this, what we see with, frontal systems, does it bundle and become circular, so to speak? The more circular our weather is, especially with cyclones on our planet, usually the stronger the wind blows. It's just the way it is. It's physics. And that's what we look for. So that being said, let's just kind of scroll through the GFS here over the next 5 days. And you can see those frontal systems going across to the north, but nothing really down in the deep tropics. But look at this. There's just one little area here in the eastern Pacific. You see look at the little wind barbs, some cyclonic turning down there. As we get out towards around May the 7th, that's about 3 or 4 days out, right? So that's what we're looking for. Does something kind of get its act together, bundle that energy down in the deep tropics, and try to develop into something? That little system goes on off to the west. No big deal. Probably going to see some cloudiness and showers with it down there. But out here at days 6 and 7, we'll stop at a week out. And this gets us to May the 10th, right there. See? Strong high pressure out over the Atlantic. Deep tropical flow up into the southeast, into the lower plains states. That fuels the potential maybe for a lot of juicy weather and some severe thunderstorm potential there. That what we call that return flow around the backside of that big old Bermuda high, but nothing down in the tropics, not yet. So what we will be watching for later in May, see how the wind just kind of flows through here generally unimpeded from east to west? Let's see if we either get an MJO, a Madden-Julian oscillation, which is a wider, larger kind of shift in the winds and upward motion. A lot of things go on with it. Or a smaller, what we call convectively coupled Kelvin wave, where these wind barbs down here kind of switch and go this way. And then you have the trades coming up this way, and you get some turning down here, what we call the Central American gyre. Does that set up? Usually at the end of May, we start to see that. So that's what I'm going to be looking for as we go out into time. Don't see it yet, and that's fine. Good thing, because it's too early still. We've got a lot of work to do. All right, so it is still severe weather season, and we will be looking at lower 48 weather from time to time. Luckily, for the most part, the map is generally quiet today. Some red flag warnings, I think, are what these are. The pinks, fire weather issues. Some winter weather over here in the Rockies. I'll show you a live look at that in just a second with one of our cameras we have out not far from Colorado Springs, a permanently mounted cam. Severe weather here for the southeast, including a tornado watch for portions of Georgia into the Carolinas. And that's about it. Kind of quiet overall, which is good to see. Looking at the Storm Prediction Center today, that's where the enhanced risk is. Parts of Texas, Oklahoma, up into Arkansas. You probably saw that incredible drone video from Brian M. Finger yesterday on Twitter and social media in general. Amazing. So the severe weather is basically squashed to the south and east of the traditional Tornado Alley area, what most people think of as Tornado Alley, just this general region out here, shifted south and east of there, even my area today in eastern North Carolina under a slight risk. But no major outbreaks expected. That being said, think about today. We had a confirmed tornado in the Atlanta area, the Atlanta metro area. Tupelo yesterday, and then last week, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Norman, Oklahoma. We haven't had major giant earth-scraping tornadoes or a gigantic outbreak with 150 tornadoes over 2 days, but we don't have to have that to have a big impact. It's just like with hurricanes. You don't have to have 30 named storms or 20 named storms to have a big season. And, even though we haven't had major severe weather problems on a widespread basis, it has been impactful. Last week's damage, over $3 billion, and from hail mostly and wind damage. So anyway, tomorrow's outlook still focused down in the heart of Dixie for the most part. So any chasers out there, be careful. That's rough down there. And my hat's off to you if you can be successful and stay safe. And then it shifts east out to day 3. This may get some upgrades to some slight risk action in the eastern U.S. And then days 4 through 8, not much happening in the guidance. The predictability and the probability and all that's too low. But we will be watching for sure because I've got an idea. That radar shot is from last week when I was out in Texas with one of my Patreon supporters. His name's Matt. He was the driver and assistant and all-around great guy from Austin. Drove up to Dallas, picked me up. I airlined a bunch of equipment out there and set up some things, doing some testing. And then we did some good old-fashioned, well, it's not really storm chasing. We didn't chase anything down. It's kind of like the hurricanes. You intercept. And you hear about, Reed Timmer talks that up all the time. We're intercepting in the Dominator. Intercepting, that's generally the word. But, I don't think I want to intercept a tornado. Not in Matt's truck, not in a rental vehicle, whatever. It gets kind of dangerous. So while we were out there, something dawned on me after we did our work, doing some testing. I had this idea. You think about in law enforcement, when you've got a car, vehicle that is in a high-speed chase, especially out in rural areas, and law enforcement generally knows where that car is going. And they get out ahead of it, and they lay down a spike strip to slow that car down and then eventually capture the criminal, or would-be criminal. Innocent until proven guilty, right? But you get the idea. That spike strip goes across the road, and they know that car is coming eventually, maybe a few minutes out. There's plenty of reality TV shows that we've seen that. It's used in the movies and whatever. You know what I'm talking about, the spike strip principle. I think something like that, or a fence, whatever you want to call it, for supercells would be really, really cool. So you've got different people driving vehicles, launching rockets and drones and probes into tornadoes and supercells. Well, what can I do? I want to contribute. I want to have a purpose. So if we look at this storm that we were on, Matt and I, last week, that's a classic, well-developed supercell right there. Hook echo, tornado in here probably. A lot of hail going on. There's Crowell, and if you go further south, Benjamin sitting in there, and several of the chasers. Charles Peak was out there. Reed Timmer was out there. We were out there. But we were over here in Childress and went through, actually we were further north, but we were in Childress and we went through Vernon, dropped south on 183 and got in front of this as it moved on to the east, and we got some good stuff out of it. Put up a live cam, caught the supercell, put up my drone. You've probably seen that video. If you haven't, check it out on my Twitter feed. Beautiful supercell, the structure. It did drop a tornado somewhere in this region. Did not drop a tornado where Matt and I were when it came near us. And it gave me an idea. And the idea is this. So here's our map. I'm actually using our tracking map, our interactive map, to show you my idea. So that supercell was located over here at the time. And Matt and I were over in Childress, which is up here off the screen. We went down into Vernon, and wait a minute, let me just back out, because I want to make sure I'm accurate here, get the map right. Where is Childress? Yeah, that's exactly what we did. So yes, let's just scoot it down, and that'll help us. So Matt and I were over in Childress enjoying some Arby's. The supercell was a right-moving supercell. It was coming up this way, headed in this general direction. That's what it looked like, and that's what it ended up doing. So we're over here, and we come through, and we drop south out of Vernon, and we intercepted the storm over here. with equipment, right? We put up a live camera, the GoPro, the drone, all kinds of stuff. And that supercell crossed through here towards Electra. Lots of chasers got video of it. It was amazing. So it gave me an idea. Why stop with just hurricanes using all this unmanned camera stuff? I do not have an armored vehicle, nor do I have the desire to have an armored vehicle and drive it into a tornado. Nothing wrong with people who want to do that. If that's your thing, great. I want to capture the full experience of what a supercell does while also contributing to the greater good, the understanding, the science, in any way that I can. And there's a lot that a lot of people are doing. There's not many frontiers left. But one thing that I think we could do is set up equipment in a much denser area along the about a mile region. I'm just speculating here that this is roughly a mile. Something like that maybe. I know I've got the little pointer over here, but for the sake of time, let's just assume that's roughly a mile. And the supercell is going to, according to radar scope and its storm tracking technology, going to cut right through there like that. We get out ahead of it, drop a whole bunch of equipment, 3 or 4 live cams, a couple of them looking this way, towards the supercell, a couple of them looking this way when it goes by, and put a bunch of GoPros out there, set them up on fence posts, utility poles, whatever we can, and arm every single one of those over that mile area with these little Kestrel sensors, set them to the highest frequency of sampling possible, which I think is 1 second. It may go higher frequency than that, but even 1 second is pretty good. And then we get the heck out of the way, drop south, to some safe area to the south, and wait for the storm to go by, and then go back to this area, pick up our equipment. Yes, if it has a tornado, it might hit some of those poles or fence posts and scatter our stuff to the 4 winds. We can use that new Apple tag thing that they got to track it. We can put tiles on there, whatever. We're not necessarily trying to get the tornado to hit our equipment, because I pretty much know what a tornado looks like inside of it. It's like being inside of a vacuum. It doesn't look like anything. It's just a bunch of dirt and, whatever. That's not the point. The point is to show the effects from multiple cameras, both live when possible, but also in 4K detail, because with these being short-fused setup situations, we can set the GoPros to 4K. They only need to run for like a half hour and we're good to go. And the batteries on them will run just fine. I mean, look, this is a battery right here to a typical GoPro. That'll run a GoPro for an hour. That's plenty of time. I'm talking setting this up like 20 minutes before the supercell gets there. And then in the future, if we have enough funding and personnel, you have another crew that's going to do the same thing over here. Setting up a bunch of equipment to capture it over there, like a spike strip, to try to capture and slow down. In this case, we're not capturing or slowing down the storm, but it's just a way to get you to understand what I mean. They put spike strips across the road for a fleeing vehicle. I think we could do something similar for supercells. And by the way, I teased it earlier. I do want to show you that it is snowing over here in Colorado. There's our permanent camera near the Colorado Springs area. Oh, there you go. It's snowing. Interesting. I wanted to show you because I think it's neat. Now back to me as I wrap things up. I know it's a distraction, but I love the winter weather. I can see it from the warmth and comfort of my own home. But yes, and that has relevance because yes, there's still winter weather. That's your cold air, your troughs. Those drop down into the Great Plains, and that could give us an opportunity later in May, this month. I'm not talking next year. I want to do it now. So I spoke with Brent, I spoke with Matt, and I'm going to talk with Greg tonight, and we're going to formulate this idea that later in the month, and even our buddy Mike Farrow, go out again, but this time, instead of trying to put a bunch of cameras all over the place and hope for the best, we track one of those supercells down. You look at that one again, get in front of it, put a bunch of equipment out here, densely located, whatever, as dense as we can, and see what we get. The time lapse of it could be amazing. It could be very helpful to scientists. I don't know. Let's just put it out there, make it all available like open source. Don't charge any money for it at all. It's just free, crowdfunded by people who support our project in advance. So we don't have to worry about selling video to the media, stuff like that. We have a purpose, and I think that's what the purpose will be. We'll try it. If it doesn't work and it becomes more difficult than I anticipated, then we can reassess. All right? So there you go. As we get closer to hurricane season, those are the things that we're working on. Hurricane Awareness Week. Next week, we'll talk about that at that point in time. And then who knows, maybe shortly thereafter, we will be heading back out into the nation's midsection for some really intriguing severe weather work, expanding on what we've done with hurricanes and applying it to supercells. I think that could be really interesting, and it might yield some fascinating results. You never know unless you try, and I think we'll give it a good try, especially with your help. Patreon.com is how we are supported, /HurricaneTrack, that's us. And there's actually a lot of other people in storms, weather, storm chasing, whatever, on Patreon. So search them out. Weathernerds.org is. I don't know of any chasers off the top of my head. Sorry, but I was just thinking, it's not just us. Patreon helps a lot of people that do this stuff in the crowdfunding world. So check it out. I'm also on Twitter @HurricaneTrack, YouTube as well. Subscribe, like the video, share the video, and become a part of what we're doing. I would love to have you along with us and join the journey, right? Go with us as we do this virtually. And then some people like Matt and others, they actually help us out in person. What an amazing world. All right, that's it from me for now. As always, thanks for tuning in. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. I'll talk to you again a week from today.